Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today we're reviewing for you Capcom Arcade Stadium on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the wonderfully scrupulous Will Freeman and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. Even if you harbour a deep and sincere love for classic gaming, it can sometimes be tricky to muster a bounty of enthusiasm when a new retro gaming compilation lands. Over time, we have perhaps become a little bit spoiled by the sheer abundance of access to the mainstream of the video game form's past. Iconic outfits such as Sega and Capcom have shared collections of their most beloved games over and over, and now we find ourselves in the era of micro-consoles and series like Hamster's Arcade Archives. For all those reasons, access to retro games feels increasingly familiar. For some, that familiarity has even bred contempt. There are those that feel that they are being asked to buy the same games over and over for different formats, and that's a valid perspective, but the counterpoint there is that each new compilation from the likes of Capcom arguably brings important and influential works to a brand new generation of players. Which brings us neatly and nicely to the recently released Capcom Arcade Stadium. Certainly, it contains some strikingly familiar titles, some of which have already been available on Switch via compendiums such as the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection and Capcom Beat 'em Up Bundle, yet it does a great deal more than simply repackage a spread of commonly bundled games, thanks to a variety of display options, scoring guides, and more. It's also fairly distinct in its focus, showcasing a relative bias towards shooters, which vastly outnumber the purebred fighting games available. But before we get into that, it's worth clarifying the various ways that Capcom's latest compendium is available, because my word, you can download Capcom Arcade Stadium, or at the very least its front end, completely free. That grants you one game in the form of the vintage shooter 1943, and if you were quick at the start, you could also add Ghosts and Goblins for no extra cost for a limited time. Beyond that, a generous spread of 30 additional games is also available. The full lot will set you back £29.99 or $39.99 depending on where you live, and other currencies as well. Or you can buy them as 3 packs of 10 games priced at £11.99 each. This trio of packs groups titles by era, with the first focusing on those released between 1984 and 1988, the second gathering arcade classics from 1989 to 1992, and the last covering 1992 to 2001. Now, a retro game compilation is ultimately judged on the spread of games, the accuracy of their realization, and the extras that modernize the package. The first point is naturally highly subjective. If you find 4 of your all-time favorites contained within, does that mean that the one inclusion that you consider to be an absolute stinker detracts from the package's worth to you? We don't know. That said, in offering so many greats, it's hard to refute the core quality of this game package right here with all the games in it. There are a great many fantastic games included, from titans of arcade history to curious little gems that maybe you haven't actually heard of. Thrillingly, Cave's remarkable shooter Pro Gear is included as well, the only other release since its 2001 release on the CPS2 arcade hardware being the rather pricey Capcom Home Arcade, which was rather pricey. As mentioned above, the fighting games that are so central to both the history of Capcom and arcade culture itself are surprisingly low in number. In fact, there are just 4 included, 3 of which are Street Fighter 2 variants. And that 4th one is the visually lavish, if mechanically average, mech brawler Cyberbots, which, me personally, Alex, I had quite a lot of fun with. There are equally a great many scrolling beat-em-ups to buoy up the lack of traditional fighters, such as Final Fight, Captain Commando, Powered Gear, Battle Circuit, Dynasty Wars, and its spin-off Warriors of Fate, all worth your time. Yet, while the selection of beat-em-ups is impressive, it is perhaps a genre that will appeal to a narrower band of arcade devotees. Plus, if you happen to own the aforementioned beat-em-up bundle, you will already have access to these games. There are also several classic platformers that have aged rather well, particularly Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, and the brilliant Bionic Commando. The less celebrated maze game pirate ship Hikamaru marks another delightful inclusion. One of Capcom's earliest works, it gently whispers of what was to eventually become Bomberman, or at least the idea of it. The curious, charming platformer Megatwins also deserves an honorable mention for bringing something a little less familiar to the lineup. The shooter selection, meanwhile, is quite a little bit staggering. Cave's horizontal bullet-hell Pro Gear is surely the standout, bringing tremendous depth, exquisite visuals, and enough replay value to fill dozens of hours or more. Add the likes of GigaWing, 1944 The Loop Master, which is another console first if you ignore Capcom Home Arcade again, Varth 19XX The War Against Destiny, Carrier Airwing, and oddities like Legendary Wings and Section Z, then there's more than enough reason to invest, even if you forget the other genres entirely. If you have access to plenty of those titles, however, you're gonna be more concerned with the additional features, aren't you? Fortunately, Capcom has plenty in place. Online leaderboards, special limited time challenge modes, and new abilities such as rewinding games on the fly or changing their speed all bring plenty fresh. There are also an abundance of display options that should cover a range of preferences. Whether you insist on scan lines, more contemporary smoothing, or even an arcade cabinet frame with other games boiling away in your peripheral vision, Capcom Arcade Stadium has you covered. There's also a range of rotation options, meaning the scattering of vertical games included are flip grip compatible. In terms of performance authenticity, for the vast majority of players, Capcom Arcade Stadium will be absolutely ideal. It is, however, ultimately a collection of ROMs served through emulation. In keeping with that, players across the globe seem to be having inconsistent experiences. We came across some flicker and frame drop on occasion on some of the older games, and detected input lag in GigaWing that felt slightly limiting. But Pro Gear, for example, performs very well indeed, even when compared to the original arcade hardware, and yes, we tested it. Still, if you are a seriously devoted arcade purist, brace yourself for slight inconsistencies with some of the game's performances. Perhaps more pressing is that so many of these titles were created to be played with a stick, nose to a large tube screen, and as such, some don't translate ideally to the Switch's handheld mode and its analog thumbstick. Playing some of the shooters at a higher level, trying to push score and milk the game's systems at times proved remarkably tricky on a tiny screen and less than ideal controls. Throw those same games over to a full-sized screen with an arcade stick, and suddenly they are a great deal more manageable. Many of the fighters and beat-em-ups, meanwhile, are much more portable friendly. Finally, Capcom Arcade Stadium certainly deserves credit for the game manuals that give thorough overviews of many of the game's titles, more arcane gameplay or scoring elements. It would have been nice to see more historic documentation of the included games, perhaps flyer scans and development history, stuff that was included with packages such as SNK 40th Anniversary and the aforementioned Street Fighter collection. Equally, there are so many different messages and screens of options to navigate, it can be easy to lose oneself in the menu salad, but that's a minor complaint. Overall, Capcom Arcade Stadium is a very good package filled with brilliant games, each updated with modern functionality. It doesn't rival the quality of original hardware or the likes of M2's sublime individual ports of arcade masterworks as seen with the release of S-Day Ras Sai, but at £30 for 32 games, it is well worth the price, warts and all. You've reached the end of the review. That means it's time for Alex's personal thoughts, and well, I didn't grow up with a lot of these games. Arcades were not something that were very prevalent in my area. I played a few bits and bobs growing up, but realistically, they just weren't a big thing. Not like they were. Having said that, I had really good fun with this game. There are certain elements that have aged a little bit, but apart from that, it's surprising just how well some of these games are still just so enjoyable, and, you know, if they were made with modern graphics and everything like that, you maybe apart from like the arcade systems like dying so quickly and stuff like that, if you were to kind of gloss over that, some of these games could be released today. I found Megatwins to be a little bit clunky to say the least. I'm not entirely sure that would necessarily work in a modern setting, but it was fun nonetheless. You know, it was a different kind of side-scrolling platformer that I haven't played before, and that's always good fun. This is obviously appealing to retro game fans, and if you haven't got some of these games or you just want a nice and easy and convenient way to play them on the go, and you look at the list and you sort of think, yeah, I'm down with that, then you've pretty much answered your own question. If not, then maybe sort of download the free, I say free version, download the front end which has 1943 in it, give that a go and see how you get on. Maybe it's your cup of tea, maybe it's not. These sort of compendiums are quite common now, so if the games aren't your kind of thing, you may want to think twice, but if you like them like I did, it's a good